Now, folks who don't want to be in a union are free to choose whether they fund that union or not. That's what our Constitution requires. That's what the Supreme Court ruled, and I think rightly so.
Governor Bruce Rauner, thank you for coming to AEI.
Great to be with you today.
It's a good day today. Earlier this morning,
it
Justice Alito's opinion came out in the Janus case. You were at the court?
I was. We were there listening to the ruling. It was very exciting.
Very exciting. What was the milieu around the court on the steps afterwards?
A lot of excitement. A lot of folks out to support our side of the arguments. It was very exciting. Today was historic. Today, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of freedom of speech and freedom of affiliation for public sector employees across America.
Yep.
It was a wonderful ruling. They also ruled in a way that really helps taxpayers who have borne the burden of the unfair excessive cost that comes from the dynamic between government union leaders and the politicians that they work with and help elect.
Right, and this was your case a long time ago. It doesn't have your name on it anymore,
right.
But can you give me a little of the backstory?
Yeah.
When did you file it? Why'd you file it?
Yeah, so I became governor of Illinois in January of 2015. And in my first 3 weeks in office, I signed an executive order that ended the union dues collection for state employees who didn't want to be in the union, didn't want to pay the dues, and I sued AFSCME. So this was my original lawsuit. I sued AFSCME because I wanted to stop them from forcing state employees to pay dues that they didn't want to pay and that they didn't support. Mark Janus stepped up heroically. He and other state employees wanted to join, but Mark Janus had the strength of his conviction and the courage. He stepped up and joined my lawsuit, and then he ultimately became the lead plaintiff because he had been paying union dues. I never had. I'm actually a volunteer as governor. I don't even take any compensation.
Right.
So he had the right standing, and he led the effort, and we all owe him an incredible debt of gratitude.
Right, and this was coming up. We've been paying attention to this here a lot, particularly me on teachers unions and focus on that. But in the original context, this is coming out of Illinois. Now it's obviously a federal
this impacts
issue,
all states. Yeah.
But my question is, did the genesis for this, was it something special about Illinois, or was it a national issue in your mind from the start?
Well, it's actually both. It is a huge national issue, but it's a huge issue in the state of Illinois. Illinois has had forced union dues payments since 1983. I've always believed that was a violation of government employees' freedom of speech for teachers as well as state and local employees. And now their freedom of speech is restored and their freedom to make their own political choices. What the judges in essence ruled is that the government unions, taxpayer-funded unions, are fundamentally different than private sector trade unions. Yep. They said that government unions, by their very nature, everything they do, every activity, is political. It has ramifications for government policy, government spending, taxpayers, and to force anybody who disagrees with the union to fund that is a violation, forcing their political speech. They made the right decision on this.
Right. Now, I noticed, and I pay attention to this, I'm sort of an economist. Now, I noticed in the opinion today that it said that Mark Janus's dues were 78% of what union dues were. His agency fees were that much. Mm-hmm. And, my argument has been without agency fees, the price of union membership effectively goes up dramatically because the alternative is now zero. So the question that I have for you is, Illinois specific or across the board, what do you think this is going to do to teachers' union, public sector union membership?
We'll see. Now, folks who don't want to be in a union are free to choose whether they fund that union or not. That's what our Constitution requires. That's what the Supreme Court ruled, and I think rightly so. I think the important thing to understand is government unions are different. Everything they do is political. In private sector trade unions, the majority of what they do is purely negotiating with an employer, has no impact on government policy, no impact on taxpayers. So separating out their political dues is appropriate. That distinction of fair share is appropriate in the private sector. Doesn't apply in government. All the dues have a political impact, and therefore requiring any to be paid is forced political speech and therefore unconstitutional.
Right. Now, did anything surprise you about the ruling? Any of the specifics that came out about it? Or were you expecting it to kind of come like in the form it did.
This is what we were hoping for and what we expected.
Right.
Our team is still reviewing all the nuance.
Sure.
I believe that the ruling was fairly broad and really very supportive. This ruling, some people will spin this as anti-union. This is not anti-union. This is pro-worker and pro-taxpayer. And pro-good government, and it's a historic, great victory.
Right. One of the notions in there that I did not expect to come out necessarily was Alito said, this is requires affirmative consent. You have to opt into the union. It's not you belong to the union if you opt out. I'm wondering if you expected that component, and if you think that's important or sort of secondary to the First Amendment issues, especially as it plays down to union strength moving forward.
Well, I think it is a very important part of the ruling. I did not anticipate that.
Right.
Our team is looking at the ramifications of that right now. That may have some significance. The core issue, though, that they correctly decided, the big decision is that all the activity of government unions is political, and therefore any dues of any type at any level is forced political speech. That is the correct ruling, and that is historic victory for public sector employees.
Right. In the dissent, which I still haven't been able to read in full because it's a long dissent, but Kagan says, she writes a lot about saying, a boot has been around for 40 years, and we have a bunch of contracts that are based on this, and there's going to be upheaval and change. Yeah. And I understand that doesn't necessarily trump First Amendment arguments, but even holding that trump card aside, how much change do you think we're in for in Illinois, across the nation?
Yes, I've heard these arguments, and some of the justices made it today when I was in the court, and I believe that argument is fundamentally wrong. It's false. Already, 28 states already don't force non-union members to fund union activity at any level, so this is already established. And in the federal government, for decades and decades, the federal government does not require federal employees who don't want to be in a union to fund any of the union activity at any level. This is well established. It doesn't cause disruption. And the fact that there are certain contracts in place, those contracts will continue to exist. They'll be negotiated again when they're up. I do not see any massive disruption whatsoever.
Really? I focus on teachers' unions, and I've focused sort of on NEA membership and where it's gone of late. And I'll tell you, the states that have agency fees, they have a lot more teachers' union membership. I mean, they just are overrepresented. Yeah. So across the nation, I wonder, what do you think the broader downstream implications of this decision are, beyond the individuals who are affected by this and some of the union members that may go along with the union speech, even though they might politically differ from them. What do you see as the long-term effects?
Well, we'll see what the outcome is. I know in Illinois, I have been approached by literally hundreds of public sector employees, teachers, local government employees, state employees, who've come to me and said they don't agree with their union, they don't want to be supportive of it, they don't want to fund it, and they feel like their rights are being violated. I heard this for years, and I heard it a lot when I was running for governor about 5-6 years ago. So we'll see how they ultimately choose. But in America, America's about freedom fundamentally. And now their rights to freedom and free choice and affiliation and free speech has been restored to them as it rightfully should be.
Well, how about the political dynamics? It's an open secret that unions favor Democrats, largely speaking. They have political alliances there. Their money flows there. Do you see political ramifications either for the parties or for whether the unions may be able to loosen up on those affiliations, since this may be a linchpin that they sought for Democrats to keep in place?
Well, we'll see what the ramifications are over time. I really focus on what's good policy, what's good for taxpayers, what's good for employees, what's good for the people of Illinois. And I believe this decision is good policy. It's constitutionally right and correct. This is good for our democracy in America and the state of Illinois. It's good for state employees. It's good for workers, and it's good for taxpayers. This is historic, positive development.
Right. Well, it's certain that 5 justices agree with you, and it's now the law of the land. you are facing reelection upcoming in 2018.
Reelection, I'm being challenged in November, that's right.
You're challenged, and I'm sure your opponent is going to use this sort of as an issue to try and wedge you against voters. How are things looking in the election campaign, and what should we look for after you're reelected, I'm assuming?
Well, I have loved to serve the people of Illinois. It's a humbling, deeply, I appreciate it very much. I've enjoyed transforming government so it really works for the people, making government more efficient and effective, trying to reduce the tax burden, trying to make our economy more competitive through free enterprise and reducing the regulatory burden on our job creators. And this historic government ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court to impact government workers will allow me to work with the state employees to drive even more value for taxpayers and reform our government. This is a very exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Well, this opinion, no doubt, is going to be historic. Changes the law of the land, changes big changes for the labor movement, and for citizens as they choose to join or not.
That's right. Historic, positive change across America. Wonderful result for the people of Illinois. I'm very excited about today.
All right. Governor Rauner, thank you for coming by and talking with us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Hey everyone, that's the end of our discussion with Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner. Thanks for watching. As always, let us know what other topics you'd like AEI scholars to cover on Viewpoint. And to learn more about the Janus decision, check the links in the description below.